Do you remember the first time you met Richard Nixon?
Do I remember the first time I met Nixon? It might have been at the Pierre Hotel when he brought together all the people who worked so hard to get these pre-election, pre-inaugural task force reports written. And the idea was to bring the best experts in and to give advice for the now serious work of a new government. I met him then.
As a Rockefeller man, what was your impression going in of Nixon?
Well, I wanted to go into the government, and I was hoping I would be selected for a position that interested me. And the position that I finally decided I had a number of choices. The position I finally decided I wanted was to be in charge of human resource, which is most domestic policies in the budget. The budget really matters in government. And the day we had the dinner at the Pierre Hotel that I was telling you about, I had written a welfare task force report on welfare reform is something, Mr. President, maybe you should do. The next day, the front page of the New York Times, top of the fold, was a leak of my that task force report. And I thought, oops, that's me. I'm not gonna, somebody's gonna think I leaked it. I was very worried I wouldn't be able to go into government. I wanted to be part of the new government. I thought exciting, important things could be done. Nelson Rockefeller met with Nixon and assigned me. He said, no, you're gonna go work for President Nixon. And I did. I'm very pleased and proud I did. I think we did things that really we should be proud of.
In your talk in the forum today, you described a meeting, another meeting, in which it was clear that Nixon knew you.
Right. Well, the way it happened was, I mean, I hadn't talked to Nixon very much, and I didn't have really a high position. It was a good job that I had, but I had written these two reports on revenue sharing and welfare reform for the new government. And I was at the first meeting of the Urban Affairs Council, standing next to Pat Moynihan, always interesting to be with Pat. And he was a little nervous, and the cabinet was assembled, and the door opened, and in walks the President of the United States, new president. And Moynihan, not knowing quite what to say, said, Mr. President, you know Dick Nathan. And the president turned to me, because I didn't really know he knew me. He said, I liked his reports, the revenue sharing and the welfare report, but Everett Dirksen, the minority leader, he didn't like that report, which signaled to me that this was being studied, circulated, seriously considered, and that was really the sort of essential beginnings of the new Federalism domestic program, which was a very important system of ideas that people don't give the Nixon administration credit for, and it was wonderful today to have a chance to talk about what we did and what was involved.
How would you describe or define or characterize sort of the essence and the ethos of Richard Nixon's new federalism?
Well, after the meeting I just described, I met with him often because he would call us in to talk about what was being worked on, and he wanted to hear about it, and he had his own ideas about it, and he understood it well, and so my sense of Nixon was I was surprised. He's very smart. We all knew that, but he's also substantive. He was following the process, involved in the process, and it would have never happened were it not for the way he organized people and worked with ideas and got it pulled together and pushed forward.
I think there's a question, it's almost become a conventional wisdom, I think, amongst historians and observers, that Nixon really wasn't interested in domestic affairs, or he was so interested in foreign affairs and foreign policy that the domestic side was sort of the poor stepchild. Is that your observation?
Well, I don't, even if it was true, here's what I would say. He had a bold program. It was his program. It was well received and a respected and important moment for domestic policy in the country. And even if it isn't everywhere in things he wrote and said, it was his program and his doing. But the fact of the matter, too, is I think that's wrong. I think the president was very involved. We collected lists of times he sent messages to the Congress, spoke about the new programs, spoke about welfare particularly. I mean, he really internalized the suffering of people, and indeed people in his family. It was something that it wasn't just abstract. It was interesting to me that he cared about something that in politics is not easy to care about in a very real, very serious way, and he continued to do that throughout this period when the program was being developed. It could have been a better program, it could have succeeded where it should have, but that's another story.
One of the surprising, I guess unintended consequences of unveiling the 4 elements that he did on August 8th, 42 years ago today, I guess, in his speech, was that the welfare reform greatly overshadowed, at a poor second, revenue sharing, and then the others sort of trailed off into insignificance. But ironically, the one that was overshadowed, revenue sharing, is one that actually passed. Why did that succeed, and why did the welfare reform fail?
Well, welfare reform was a surprise. Here's a Republican president, and he's going to tackle this Mount Everest issue of can you solve the welfare mess of the country? And he worked on it, and he cared about it, and it was picked up because it was a surprise. It was also, in his initial proposals, it was 5 times bigger in terms of budget impact, the amount of spending, to the revenue sharing program. Both were featured and important, but revenue sharing overshadowed, I think, welfare reform overshadowed the revenue sharing proposal because it wasn't expected, and it was large, and it wasn't what you thought Nixon was going to do. Now, on revenue sharing, I would say the reason it succeeded was because his government, and it was his people, stuck with it. It wasn't something that Congress would like to do. They like to put their names on whatever program is enacted is, my program for this or my program for that. Here's a system which says we want people closer to the community, people closer to officials closer to the people to make their own decisions and set their own priorities. We don't want you to do it. And to get that through the Congress took a while and was not easy, and it was accomplished. And it was a symbol and a signal of changing the way government operates from the heavy-handed, mother knows best, great society, bureaucracy will solve your problems way of the programs that had been passed in the decade or so before he became president.
Were there any points that you had wanted to make or thought to make in the forum that you didn't get to?
Let me think a second. Yes.
And if you could,
I'll do it. Uh, I've been here today at the library. This period of my life, 3 years I worked under George Shultz, mostly under Shultz in the budget, still, personally, the most exciting, most gratifying time in my professional career, and I've had a lot of exciting and good experiences. I'm fortunate, I have to say that. I feel I am. Now, what I would most like to say, and I don't think what I would most like to say is that it's time now to figure out good ways to show people that serious, substantive work of historical importance on many issues was undertaken and was successful in the Nixon presidency. And I had a friend once, a reporter, who sort of gave me a little help as I was working and learning about how to operate in government. He said, what people like, Dick, is things that are counterintuitive. I didn't know that. And I think as we approach the 100th anniversary of President Nixon's birth, and think about him with more time to reflect and look back, that what is counterintuitive and needs to be highlighted is the seriousness and boldness and importance of what he did in many areas of his presidency. And I hope, and I would love to help in this, that there will be a way to find not just older people. I mean, we're too old really to say all of this. We need to convince scholars coming up and younger people and people who are in government now to recognize that there were achievements, ideas, and purposes of the Nixon presidency that get overshadowed by the sort of stereotype. And people like that. People like to see you say things, I never thought about this. So it's an opportunity, I think, for the library and the foundation to put this positive, good foot forward, but it's very hard to do.
How would you describe Richard Nixon's legacy?
He was, in a way, the last of the moderate Republicans. He was, I'd worked for Nelson Rockefeller, and I wasn't sure I'd really be happy and do things I cared about, but I wanted to be in government because I'd never been inside of a presidential system. But, you know, Barry Goldwater had gone before, but he didn't really take hold. He was a wonderful person. I remember meeting him. Very friendly, very fine person. But this was still the late 60s and the early 70s. It was a time when people could come together. Nixon often used that phrase, bring people together. And somehow his personality didn't reflect that. Man was never the warmest person. I mean, today when we saw the little picture, the picture of him at the signing ceremony, I thought that was wonderful. He was very relaxed, and he did it with just the right feeling. But his administration and his way of governing was the kind of governing a country has to have, of a functioning, well-functioning democracy is a system in which people share ideas, work with ideas, and come together on what they can do together. And Nixon was that kind of a president. It was that kind of a presidency. And I've always been a Republican. I still say I'm a Republican, but it's harder now. And we need also to say and find ways to say about President Nixon that he worked with Democrats, he worked with people who were, you know, deeply into the subject and could help his government work out their ideas. When they set up the task forces, I chaired 2 of the task forces to prepare for the new presidency. We were told, pick anybody you want. You don't have to pick Republicans. You don't have to pick people we're going to approve. You're in charge. Give us good ideas. And we may not use them. It's supposed to be an internal process. At least that's what I thought. But there was that spirit of how can we find ways to work things out and, excuse me, a little cough today.
You know, water?
No, I'm okay. I can finish this.
Let's stop for a minute,
Okay.
and then,
I've got some coffee. I'll take a sip. No, I'm getting over something. It's an allergy.
well, we're making you talk here.
Go do it. No?
Think about other thoughts.
That's one.
If you pick up just at a, with a new sentence.
Okay. I think that as we reflect on the Nixon presidency, we ought to give a lot of serious attention to the style of decision-making. By that I mean the process of getting the best ideas and figuring out how to work with them and how to bring people together and get a coalition to support them. And of course to do them in ways that fit what the president wants to have happen and what he thought he was elected to do. But there was this sense of working together, of compromising and bargaining. The American political system is so complicated, with 3 branches and all different types of governments, that the founders created it so that it would be hard to do things too fast. And it was built to be a system in which decisions would be deliberative and would involve this kind of process of working together and working things out. And that, I think, is more of what the Nixon administration did. And Ehrlichman was a very key part of this. And it needed John because as brilliant as Pat was, and Arthur, I knew them both, and Pat wanted me to work for him, but I didn't want to do that. I liked him a lot, he was a good friend, but it needed somebody who could work for the president in the way I said presidencies and his presidency worked. Presidency should work and his presidency worked. And I mean, it's a shame that we can't think about it that way. And to me, I said this in the panel today, the greatest tragedy, I worked a lot with Ed Morgan, people didn't mention him, but he was wonderfully smart, caring guy who could listen, could learn, could pick things up, could critique things. And John Ehrlichman, Ken Cole, people I worked with the closest, they were the same. And the fact that John went off and did things that, you know, make him part of the legacy of the things we don't like to talk about, that was to me the most shocking, and I was really very sorrowful, very sorry, very sad that it you know, got caught up. We got caught up in things that spoiled a lot of what we achieved and what could have still achieved. That's a tragedy. And yet, even saying that, there's a very positive, good story to tell and work on and present not in the voices of people. I'm 76 years old, but I'll be pushing 80 when it comes time to have a centennial. So you need to, I want to help the people that, Jeff Shepard and I talked about this, that can be, can work with scholars and papers and those of us who were part of this here at the library here with the foundation, to tell the story that ought to be told. And people are going to want to hear it. Gee, I didn't think of that. So I do think there's an opportunity. I don't think it's necessary that there's a sort of a catch here that you can use for your advantage.